This is a really important Sunday in the life of the church. It's the Sunday before the 4th of July. Many of our family and friends are either on vacation or heading to vacation or at the lake or at the beach, and we're saying, man, I wish I was with you, right? This is also the week before we celebrate our national independence. And this is very interesting that our sermon series, Back to the Bible, falls. Last week I was talking about the Exodus. This week we're going to talk about the conquest of the Holy Land. And it's interesting that it falls on this Independence Week. Now, I'm not equating the United States with Israel. We're a unique place, a very special place, a very good place, I believe. We have our faults. We've had our faults since our inception. We have not always lived up to our ideals, and we can always do better. But, we are sitting here freely worshiping this morning, where we otherwise might not be able to in other places. So I'm very excited to get to celebrate 4th of July. But I want to take a moment this morning before we get there to reflect on what happened in the conquest. Now, I told you last week one of my favorite movies is Ten Commandments. That's right, Charlton Heston, the golden calf throwing down. It's just a great movie. It's a spectacle. Him riding, in that chariot, whipping them. And then if you go watch Ben-Hur, you get to see him riding with, more horses in a chariot. Great stuff. I love those movies. But nobody's making movies much about the conquest of the Promised Land. It's not video movie friendly because it's a long story, right? So I want to tell you that story this morning, and here's where I want to connect with you. That story starts the minute the people walk out of Egypt. It's not when they cross the Jordan. It's not when they conquer the first foe. It is when they take that first step out of Egypt. Because they're moving by the will of God to a specific place at a specific time. Have you ever felt like God was calling you to move in a specific direction? To move in a specific way at a specific teeth back in. Specific place at a specific time. Right? When I was 25 years old, I felt the call of God on my life to go into ministry. Actually, I had felt it all the way back in my teenage years and fought and ran from it. Had struggled with it for, 10 years or longer. And I finally answered that call to ministry. I said yes. I have a friend that lives in Kentucky, and very successful businessman. And he felt like God was calling him to open a Christian coffee house as an outreach to the community. So people could go drink their coffee. Maybe you really get into coffee. I'm not into coffee that much, but maybe you're one of these double soy latte, triple shot espressos with light foam kind of people, right? I'm not. I'd like a Diet Coke, please. But he felt God calling him to start this thing. Called it Live Wire. And he had a room. Okay, youth, listen up. He had a room in the back where he had an entire wall that he had turned into a bank of LED, like LCD TV screens. Like before that was a thing, he had engineered it and wired it and got it working. And they had games and video games that you could go play. It was a place for kids to go hang out with. There was a recording studio in the back where he was allowing local Christian bands. They would have comedy nights with Christian comedians, open mic nights where local Christian bands could come and play. Oh, and by the way, he just happened to start a church there. That's crazy, right? I've got another friend that was a $6 to 7 figure salary guy at FedEx. And he felt a burden for kids growing up in inner city Memphis that couldn't get as a good an education as his kids who he sent out to Christian brothers. Hurt him deeply. And it began chewing on him. And he felt like God was calling him to start a Christian academy for underprivileged kids in the Binghamton neighborhood. His church was chewing on the same thing. The leadership of the church was chewing on the same thing. And so he left his job to go be the headmaster of that academy. They started it in the basement of Christ Methodist Church, Memphis. Basement. People had to apply to have their kids come there, but it was free. And their only commitment was to make sure that every, let me say this again, look at somebody and say every child felt loved, and every child felt important. And that every child got as good an education as the best schools in Memphis. And every morning, he met every child at the front door and hugged them and told them God loves them. Flash forward a year, and every one of those children that were in that school had gone up a grade and a half in their reading level in 1 year. That at the end of 5 years, they had become so successful that let me say this again, the state of Tennessee, the state of Tennessee, in the city of Memphis, had built a brand new school and moved Binghamton High School to it. But what they found out was there's another school just left here empty. Hey, why don't we just give this to the academy? And they did. They gifted them. Let me say that again. They gifted them. They gifted them the old school, and they moved in. Changing lives. People told him it couldn't be done. He's stupid for leaving his job. Oh, by the way, his brother caught passion for that and left his job, making more money than his brother did, to go head up the Binghamton Development Authority, where they bring economic development into the inner city. People told him they were crazy. Have you ever been called crazy for something you were thinking about, right? Not just by somebody in your house that loves you. You know, there's two kinds of crazy, like, you are crazy. And then there's, oh, you so crazy. I mean, there's two different kinds of crazy, right? The bad kind of crazy is what everybody that hears those voices, that feels that urging, hears. But it's very liberating. Now you're saying, why is Sparks rambling on about these stories unless he has something in mind? I don't. I really don't. I don't know what God's doing inside of your heart, but I told you those stories to lay the foundation for this. Joshua and a group of other Israelites that after they had been liberated from Egypt, after they had come out, after God had defeated Pharaoh's armies, Moses sent the spies into the land. You heard a little bit of that earlier. And most of them came back and said, There are giants in the land. We are like grasshoppers to them. They will slaughter us and kill us, O my Lord. And Joshua had a kind of the same response that David did when people were telling him there's this giant called Goliath. Thank you, senior moment. This giant called Goliath, and he is threatening and taunting the armies of the Lord. And Joshua and David had exactly the same response, was, do not be afraid, oh my word. This is the great and mighty God that we serve. And who is this Philistine? Or as Joshua said, who are these people that they would stand against the armies of the Lord? Do you not know who you are? And more importantly, who you are in the Lord? Joshua was like, you have got to be kidding me. I don't care how big they are, how bad they are, or how ugly they are. God will deliver them into our hands. But the people didn't listen. They didn't believe. So the people had to wander for 40 years in the wilderness. And then Joshua leads that generations that are left into the promised land to conquer it. And God says to them, go and conquer the land. As a matter of fact, the one thing he says is don't make compromises with the people living in the land. Don't make compromises with them. Force all of them out. Completely occupy the land. Totally occupy it. We already see this pattern of Joshua being this great and mighty warrior for the Lord. This powerful, incredible, faithful individual. Uncompromising. Strong. And he encourages the people. And they go in and they start knocking off these kingdoms. It's like, any of y'all remember Mike Tyson back in the day when Mike Tyson was Mike Tyson? And he was just plowing through people. And you'd pay $49.95 for a pay-per-view, and you got about 13 seconds. And then all you had left to do was eat pie. Not that there's a specific incident I'm thinking of here, but yeah. Mike was plowing through people like a machine. And Joshua and the people of Israel were plowing through people, but then they, as my granddaddy would say, who was an old country farmer, they hubbed a stump. Y'all know what hubbing a stump means? Okay, so if you've got an older tractor that's a little lower setting, and you got a big stump and you roll over it, you can sometimes get your tractor caught up on that stump so that your wheels are spinning, right? It's called hubbing a stump because you got your hub up on a stump and you kindly stuck, and then you have to go get the mules or the horses or the hosses and go pull it off the stump, right? It's called hubbing a stump. They ran into Jericho, right? This great walled city, this amazingly powerful city-state. Now, back in those days, they didn't have necessarily country borders like we have today. They were city-states, and city-states controlled areas of the countryside around them, and Jericho was big and bad and all of that. Joshua, we know the story of Jericho, right? We made a song about it for Vacation Bible School. And the walls came a-tumbling down. They marched around the city God said march around the city every day, then blow a horn. Then march around it 7 times on that last day and blow the horn 7 times. And the walls came a-tumbling down, right? God delivered them to their hands. We see the story of Rahab in that third reading. We are often referred to Rahab as a prostitute. That has been classically an interpretation, but Some questions have been raised in recent years and in years past on whether that was fair to Rahab, because the real description of her name, it means one who works with dyed purple cloth. She would have had a household and people working for her, dyeing cloth and drying it out on the roof. Whether or not she was a prostitute or not, whether or not she was a lady, madam of a house of ill repute, is irrelevant to the point that this was a person that was not, shall we say, respected in her community. Okay? And I can tell you that because her house was in the wall of the city. Not in the inward parts, but in the wall. The first place where things come tumbling down, right? Or people are attacking or burning. Rahab was in the outskirts. She was pressed out. But God used her to take these spies that were in Jericho on behalf of Joshua and to save them. Flash forward to the New Testament. Listed within the lineage of Jesus is who? Rahab, right? Rahab is listed among the genealogies of Jesus. She was one of his ancestors. Holy moly. I mean, really. Holy moly. There's a book out several years ago called Bad Girls of the Bible. Some of y'all may have done a Bible study in there. And Rahab was featured in it, right? Rahab was told that God would spare her people, her family, if she would put out this red cord and hang it out her window, and they would know to spare her family. And in the Exodus, if they put blood over the doorposts of their houses, the angel of death would pass over them. And when one of her descendants, Jesus of Nazareth, laid down his life on the cross, his blood was applied to our hearts. And the red thread that hung out of that window runs down through all of the redemptive history of mankind. The red cord of Rahab echoes through history. And over we see God recycling these metaphors. The blood applied. The red cord of redemption. And it still goes on. We know the story that Joshua and the people of Israel eventually took Jericho and took the promised land. They crossed the Jordan. They entered in. In the scripture reading that Jeff did, we see a split. We've got the early part with Rahab, and then we jump to where Joshua at the end is telling the story to the people. And he says, "Therefore I have handed them over to you. I sent a hornet before you, and it drove out the two kings of the Amorites for you, not by your sword, nor your own bow. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities which you had not built, and you have lived in them, and you're eating of the vineyards and olive groves which you did not plant." You see, God said, look, I did what I said I would do for you, right? I did it. I did what I promised. I fulfilled my promise to you. I did it. I've given you what I promised you. Then Joshua goes on to say this. Now therefore, and if therefore is there, it's there for a reason. Fear the Lord and serve Him in sincerity and truth, and do away with the gods which your fathers served beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served, which are beyond the Euphrates River, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. You see, the people had conquered. The generation that had doubted whether they could take the Holy Land had died. And Joshua and his leadership led them into the promised land. And God said, take all of it. But there was a couple of little dark secrets. They failed to completely take the land. God said, take it and drive everybody else out. Now that seems harsh to me and you, right? Seems horrible. But God knew that He had a bigger purpose, which was getting to Jesus. Remember, all of this is about getting to Jesus. He knew that the purpose of driving out the other people is to prevent His chosen people from being corrupted by other influences in their midst. Right? So He said, drive them out. They didn't. They compromised. And Joshua, partly to blame, they made covenants and made pacts with a couple of kings that were helpful to them in some of their conquests. And the guy, it's like, hey, why you want to drive us out? Didn't we help you with this, and didn't we help you with this, and didn't we help you with this? Let's all just live together, right? Okay. So they did. The other little dark secret was that a lot of the people had brought their family idols out of Egypt with them. And they usually kept them either in a cupboard if they had like a brick house, or if they were living in tents, they'd have an area that they'd have covered by a sheet where behind it was the gods they served across the river. You see, they'd go and make their offerings to God, right? They would go to the tabernacle. This is before the temple. They'd go to the tabernacle where the 10 Commandments were, which happens to begin with, thou shalt not have any other gods before me, right? But they would go do that, and then they'd pray to these other little idols because, man, nobody knew. They kind of kept it in the back room, or as we would say today, kept it on the down low, right? They just kind of kept it back here. Nobody talks about it. Nobody really discussed it. Nobody brought it out in public. And, and we made compromises, right? And they'd go to their buddies and their friends' house, and, they were worshiping another god, and they'd make an offering, and you got to be polite. So you got to do the same thing. You got to make an offering too, right? Just because you don't want to stir the feathers, right? Except God said, don't have any other gods before me, right? That's hard, right? This is where it gets, I think, down to the brass tacks for us. We are built to worship. Human beings are built to worship. And we will worship something. And if we're not actively worshiping God, we will choose something else. And we will find all kinds of things to worship. Amen. All kinds of stuff. And now we may be sitting here and thinking about, this person or that person or those persons, they do that, they do this, all Hollywood, all politicians, all these people, Satanists and I got up and looked in the mirror this morning. Yeah, I say that every time I look in the mirror. That's what I say every time I look in the mirror. Oh, Lord. And I when I'm preaching, I'm starting to get in the groove about 10, 11 o'clock the night before, where I'm going through in my head the sermon, and I wake up thinking about it, and I'm kind of just, I don't know, it's hard to describe, but I'm kind of in the zone about it. And I wasn't going to say this morning. I had no idea that I was going to say this, except that God said it to me and said I needed to say it to y'all. So I'm not saying this. This is what He told me to say, unless I was hearing things or I hit my head, which may have been possible. We had a wreck in Atlanta on the way home this week, so I don't think I have a concussion, but we're all right. So here's what I heard Him say. Because I was thinking about worshiping these other gods, and how over and over and over throughout the history of the people of Israel, their failure to occupy the lands and their accommodating other gods is what led to their downfalls. Read the entire book of Judges. Read all of the stuff with David. Over and over, their failure to occupy the land fully, all the wars, all the failures can be tied back to that. And I'm thinking, wow, man, they're just dumb. They're just dumb. Trying to hide those idols in the back room. And then God spoke to me, it's about as clear a voice as I've ever heard, and He said, what are you hiding in your back room? Ow. Sit down. Shoo. That hurt. What are you hiding in your back room? And I didn't want to talk about it. And I told God, I don't want to talk about that. And He said, I don't care. What are you hiding in your back room? And I don't know, Laura and I got to work on that. I'm going to be praying about it all week, crying over it. I don't know. I got stuff in my back closet that I need to throw away. Not, well, probably literally, but also figuratively. So my question to you this morning is, before you enter the promised land, what does God need you to get rid of? First Global Methodist Church, before we as a church can enter God's promised land for us, what do we need to get rid of? Not what we need to take up, not what we need to start doing, but what idols do we need to lay down? Right? What do we worship? What are those things? What are the things that we struggle with that we just need to go, I'm just going to give that to you, Lord. Without turning around and going, and I'll pick that back up and put it in my pocket. Right? What are the things that God is speaking to us? Because the entire conquest of the Holy Land was not about the people. They thought it was about them. But it never was. It was about God redeeming the whole world, the entire created order. That was the purpose. That was the point, and that was the plan. And they were blessed to be a blessing unto God. You are blessed people. Do you feel blessed? Do you feel like God's chosen people? You were blessed not for your own sake, but you were blessed to be a blessing. But before God can fully pour all that out in you, He needs you to help Him out, because it's the things in my closet that I'm holding on to that I can't get rid of, the gods that I worshiped when I lived across the river, that hold me back from being a blessing to others, and maybe even blessings in my own life. What other nations are you making accommodations with and letting live in your house? I'm not talking about, okay, look, somebody may be living in your house that's annoying you to death. That's not what I'm talking about. Don't throw them out today, okay? All right? Don't go home and look at the husband and wife and go, you got to get out of the house. You're annoying me. I mean, you might for 10 minutes, but I mean, you know. What other gods and people are you allowing in your life that are tearing you down? A few years ago, I was really kind of stressed out by what was happening in the world. I used to follow politics very closely. I worked as a political operative in the early 90s, ran a few campaigns. I really got intensely involved. I watched news, talk radio, blah, 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 and it depressed me. And I got very, very anxious. And at one point in time, a few years ago, I just felt God clearly telling me that I needed to take that part out of my life for a while. Right? Now, a couple of years ago, I started watching news again. It doesn't affect me the way it used to. Right? Because I can be around it and listen to it and not obsess anymore. Because it's about putting things in proper perspective. Right? Putting things in proper perspective. I have gotten a lot of compliments that I'm looking like I'm losing even more weight. Thank y'all very much. I'm working on it. But yeah, I'm working on it. But at one point in my life, God just said to me, you can't serve me and be 366 pounds. I mean, you can, but you will only do it for so long and then you'll die. And so I had to put some things out of my life. Do I still obsess over food? Yes. Is that one of my idols in my back room? Probably. Do I not need to worry about it as much? Probably. Like some of the idols that God's going to tell you to get rid of, you may not want to, right? Can I tell you the hardest one that God ever moved me to get rid of? Y'all want to hear this story? You got a second? I don't even know what time it is. We'll just keep going. It'll be all right. Kayla, what time is it? 10:20. I got 2 minutes. Okay. Keep me on task, Kaylee. I was living on the Gulf Coast and pastoring Gateway Methodist Church. And Holly and I were in our first year of marriage. And it came time to renew, hold on, this will hurt some of y'all. It came time to renew my Ole Miss season tickets. And I had 6 tickets on the 45-yard line on the east side on row 10. 6 together. And I followed recruiting. I was a recruiting nerd. I could tell you the 40 time on every D1 athlete in the state of Mississippi for about 5 years there. Andrew, I could tell you what they were benching. Right? I knew who we were on and who we were not. I subscribed to recruiting services. I spent tons of money. I just was obsessed. Right? Even more than I was with chocolate cake, which is a major concession there. And I just felt like God saying, you don't have that kind of money to spend. And you don't have that kind of time to waste. And the money and the time that you're wasting on that, you could be spending on what you're supposed to be doing. I'm like, but I don't want to, God. Have you ever said that to him? I don't want to. I don't want to give that up, Lord. Or I don't want to have to start doing that. Like I was like a little kid. I got out on the floor and threw a hissy tip. Right? Y'all ever thrown a hissy fit? I laid down on the floor and threw a hissy fit. Luckily, nobody was there to see it. Nobody videotaped it. I didn't want to do it. Back when I was a younger man, even than that, I was first getting involved in youth directing. I was a youth pastor. In fact, I tell people today I'm just an old youth pastor doing youth for adults. Right? No, I'm not going to make you get up and play a stupid game. It's okay. And I never was a drinker, not particularly. Not that there's anything wrong with alcohol, right? In moderation, all things are okay. For some of us, and I have a lot of friends that are in AA, for some people, it's not okay. It's like me around a chocolate cake. You don't leave it unattended. Right? But I was just starting in the youth ministry, and I thought, man, what would I feel like if one of my kids came over to my house and I had a bunch of beer in my fridge? I'd be like, It's like, how do I tell them not to drink when I'm drinking? It was just a credibility issue for me. And I just felt like God was calling me to lay that down. Now, that wasn't a hard one for me. If God ever calls me to completely give up chocolate cake, y'all going to have to sedate me. That's all I'm saying. Right? Different things for different people. God calls us to fully occupy the land. To be bold. All right, now I'm fixing to go out on a limb and close with this. And you always get nervous when a preacher says, I'm about to close, because they'll go on for another 20 minutes, but I'm not. The 4th of July is this week. Craig and I got into a discussion with another dude on Facebook about the proper role of religious stuff in public life and in the life of our country. I encourage you to pray for your country. Pray for your leadership. Pray for those that are not elected and are leading. Pray for your Supreme Court. But pray for each other. But be Joshua's. Be Joshua's. Be bold. Who is this that says they're going to stand up to the armies of the Lord? Be bold. Never let anyone browbeat you into thinking just because you're a Christian, you need to sit down and shut up. Amen. Be bold in your faith. Right. Be willing to exercise your faith in public. Right. Stand up and proclaim what you believe with a strong and proud voice. Notice I'm not telling you which side is right, and I'm not telling you what to say. What I'm saying is don't let your faith disqualify you from speaking into public life. Just because you're a Christian, you have a voice. And it seems to me that over and over when the people of God compromised or became afraid or anxious, that's when the failures came. Be bold. Be of good courage. God has already won the day, and He will continue to be with you. Amen? You're not alone. Stand tall. Let's go fully occupy the land. Amen? Even the land of our own heart.